good afternoon to many of you and to our friends on the East Coast and to those who are a little bit farther west or around the world. Good morning. Thank you for joining what is now the eighth week of Hiring Our Heroes virtual community. It has been an amazing 8 weeks. And as many of you know, we are honored to really start our week of training, our week of learning how to prepare in this new normal environment uh, with Motivational Mondays. And let me start out by thanking our partners at Toyota for their support of the Hiring Our Heroes program and all that we do across the world. But importantly, I want to thank Toyota for sponsoring today's motivational and every Motivational Monday speaker series. Over the last, I guess, 7 weeks, the previous 7 weeks, we've had some incredible leaders come in and talk about how to create strategic plans, how to navigate a challenging environment, how to accomplish great things when the chips are down. But today's speaker is someone who I've known for a long time, since I've been the president of Hiring Our Heroes, and someone who personally motivates me to do better each and every day. I think 7 weeks, 8 weeks now into the coronavirus, or for some it's now been 10 weeks into this pandemic. We've all been in the situation now where, we're addressing and dealing with new challenges. And many times, I think for everyone on today's webinar, we've probably been in a situation where we feel like we can't do anything more. Our rucksacks are full, and somehow God gives us one more rock to deal with, and we do it. I think as service members, we're trained to do that. As people, we're hard-coded to be able to deal with adversity. Some of us do it better than others. But what today's speaker is going to talk about, and it's so critically important, and why it's so motivating for me, is that even with those best plans, even with that rucksack full, God will have his way of putting one more rock in there, and we're going to deal with it, and we're going to find a way to still accomplish great things if we keep focused and motivated and find purpose. Sherman Gillums is, as I mentioned, a very good friend, someone I've known very long, very inspirational to me. And he has a great discussion teed up. Sherman is the Chief Advocacy Officer for AMVETS, a great organization that I've had the pleasure of working with out in California, especially when I worked with the Chapman University Clinic out there for legal defense. But Sherman, thank you for joining us. Thank you for all that you do for our service members across the country, and thank you for being here today. So Sherman, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Eric. And of course, it's always good to see you again and think back on all the work that Hiring Our Heroes has done over the years to break through on the problem of veteran unemployment. And as we said earlier when we had our chat before we came on, the unemployment problem has evolved now, and it's evolved in a way that none of us expected. What I hope to talk about today will shine a light on not just the problem, but ways that we need to look at the problem as veterans. Many of us are under this coronavirus pandemic, going through something different we hadn't endured before. So today's talk is hopefully as inspirational as it is informative. Before we get into the slides, though, I want to preface my thoughts by giving a little background to why I even came up with this topic. About 200,000 men and women in uniform leave the military every year. That's a lot of people. That's bigger than the number of folks in the Marine Corps. And some major cities in this country, we're talking about a lot of men and women who get out. And while the reasons for leaving the military vary, some are retirees, some finish their contracts, some are forced out for different reasons. But in just about every case, while we all believe we knew what to expect when we left the boot camp, we still had to go through it to fully understand it. All right. And for those of us who managed to endure the hardship, the challenges, and ultimately pass the test, a lot of that was without certainty. We did that by adapting and overcoming. All right. That became more than just a mantra to many of us. It was a way of life. It got us through advanced training. It got us through hardship tours of duty and deployment. And in many cases, it got a lot of us through combat operations that kept us alive. But for some reason, for too many of us veterans, that appears to change when we take off the uniform. Over the last 16 years, I've watched the best of us who were true badasses when it came to military service, and you see the decorations and the records of service, and they become men and women who feel lost, they feel devalued, they feel unappreciated, and even hopeless. And perhaps that may shed some light as to why we have this 20 or 22 a day problem. But I don't want to just stare at the problem and talk about it. I want to look into why this happens. Why does this happen? And I believe it happens, at least in part, because too many of us try too hard to fit into a society as civilians. We'll never fit in as civilians because we're not civilians. We're veterans. And there's a big difference. And I think that a lot of folks who get out, they think back to the time before they went in. You'll never go back to that time. You'll never be that person you were when you went to boot camp. You're a different person. You've been trained differently. You've been shaped differently. And that can't be lost just because we take off the uniform. The uniform didn't have a lot to do with it. But I think a lot of folks believe it does. So that's what I want to talk about today. All right. I'll kick it off with the first slide, if you will. Learning to be a veteran. All right. What does that even mean? Learning to be a veteran. We get our walking papers, we take off the uniform, and voila, we're supposed to be veterans, right? But that's what I want to talk about. As I go through some lessons I learned myself in my own journey of transition and over the years of veteran advocacy, I want to talk about how this lost sense of identity and purpose leads some of us to face serious problems for many of my brothers and sisters in transition. And I want to offer some thoughts on why it happens. And if it happens to some of you veterans who are watching right now, or you know somebody, what I hope to do is orient your minds to what matters most so that any hardships and distractions that are incidental to your transition don't consume you and aren't given the weight that they don't deserve. And by the end of this, my 4 principles, as it says there, 4 principles of purpose and happiness, will provide you with at least one roadmap that can be applied over the course of your journey as a veteran. Again, that you're not a civilian with an identity crisis. You're a veteran. That's what I want to talk about. Next slide, please. Now, I'm willing to bet every one of us has a bunch of photos we're proud of that are similar to this one. These pictures span my 12 years in the Marine Corps and serve as the bookends to what I consider the best years of my life, like many of you. And when I wore those uniforms, maintaining the ability to adapt and adjust to change wasn't all that tough. But for me and many career service members who spent a lot of time in uniform adapting and adjusting, leaving the military feels like we're foregoing our entire identity in many cases for one that seems inferior, or at a minimum, that's at least how we'll be regarded without the rank and the billet and decorations and the culture that gave us this identity for some time. And that concern or feeling out of place is legitimate. But I offered that not quite for the reasons that many of us assume. And what I want to do is read a quote that served as a reality check for me, and perhaps any man or woman who served in uniform and has reached a point where it's time to transition. For me, at least, it offers an explanation for why finding a fit in society is so difficult for many. It's a quote from a U.S. Army colonel named Robert Killebrew, who received the following advice from what he described as a wise old retired Marine who fought at Tarawa during World War II. And this is what he said. So you want to be a career soldier. Good for you. But remember that the longer you stay in uniform, the less you will really understand about the country you protect. Democracy is the antithesis of the military life. It's chaotic, dishonest, disorganized, and at the same time, glorious, exhilarating, and free, which you are not. After a while, if you stay in, you'll be tempted to say, look, you civilians, we've got a better way. We're better organized, we're patriotic, and we know what it is to sacrifice. Be like us. And you'll be dead wrong, son. If you're a career soldier, you may defend democracy, but you won't understand it or be a part of it. What's more, you'll always be a stranger to your own society. That's the sacrifice you'll be making. Now, just think about that for a moment. You'll always be a stranger to your own society. Not everyone who has served will have the same experience once their career is over, but the mistake any of us can make is taking off the uniform and wanting to so bad find that fit or acceptance that we essentially unlearn everything that got us here. We unlearn everything that got us to this point, right? So that's what I want to focus on. Next slide, please. Now, I get asked all the time why the rates of unemployment, homelessness, addiction, and suicide are so high among some of the most trench-tested, resilient, courageous individuals who walk the face of the earth. Notwithstanding all the legitimate factors and externalities that are beyond our control, such as the economy and social attitudes and healthcare access and practices, I believe it still comes down to our having unlearned to adapt. Right? And as we explore ways we relearn to adapt, mainly by reminding you of who you are and what got us here, we should also be aware of our unique needs as veterans. All human beings have basic needs that must be met, and knowing what those basic needs are within the context of your status as a veteran specifically, and prioritizing them places you in greater control of your life, which is the path to real happiness, as I have found in my own journey. And finally, I want to drive home the point that finding your purpose is your only mission. It's the only mission that matters. It's all that mattered in uniform, and it's all that matters when you take it off. Now, I want to go back to this notion of unlearning to adapt and kind of pose this question rhetorically. What do you suppose is the biggest reason that unlearning happens to us? All right? What do you suppose is the reason why this unlearning, if you accept that it does, why does it happen? Now, I want to tell you why it happened to me, and I can sum it up in one word. One word. And I'm not sure if everybody can see that with the with our heads there. There's a quote there. God hears our plans and laughs. All right, you see a picture of me. That's the day I finished a San Diego Marathon, and that's a more recent picture of me. And the person on the left there never thought for a minute that he'd have any relationship to the person on the right. All right, they're one and the same. We make plans, intractable, immutable plans based on what we envision must happen in order to be satisfied and happy with our lives. No one planned to fail in boot camp despite the uncertainty. In fact, the only real plan was to find a way to roll with the punches, to get through it. And the same thing happens on the battlefield. Those Navy SEALs that went in to get Osama bin Laden didn't plan to lose a helicopter, right? It just happened, and they rolled with it. But as soon as we get rejected by a few potential employers, or have relationship issues, or can't get a VA appointment where we need it, too many of us throw the idea of adapt and overcome aside. And I've seen it happen time and again. I've made a mistake as well, and I understand why it happens. Plans mean stability and certainty, especially when you're looking for life to get easier after hardship. All right, I'm not sitting in that chair for the free parking and good seats at a stadium. That wasn't part of my plan, but what became clear to me was the difficulties I faced had nothing to do with not knowing what to expect when I had to take off the uniform. It was in assuming my life would go according to plan. And when something unexpected happened, some of us forget what it meant to adapt to changing conditions, and as a result, we lose hope. And when that happens, the enemy is no longer Al Qaeda, North Koreans. The enemy is now within. It's not a human being on earth who hasn't hit obstacles. Sometimes the obstacles don't move. And so what do you do when you hit an immovable object? What did you do before? Sit down and cry? No. Give up? No. That wasn't a choice. You change your relationship to the object. You maneuver on it. You couldn't go through it. You went around it, or you went under it, or you went over it. That doesn't change when you take off the uniform. Now, I know some issues are very serious. They involve mental health. They involve physical challenges. No one wants to hire you for a job you want. You're having debt issues, family problems. It happens to more of us than you think. But don't convince yourself that that uniform was some sort of super suit that gave you power when you were on deployment, or you were training recruits, or you were competing for promotion, or trying to earn a degree after hours, or were that single parent raising a child while serving in uniform. That DD-214 didn't suddenly become your kryptonite. And I want to kind of get beyond the platitudes, because I've been saying a whole lot, but I want to get beyond the platitudes and discuss some end goals, the reasons that motivate us to overcome adversity, the why behind the how, and the needs that drive us. Next slide, please. Now, some of you who have gone to college, you've seen this chart. I didn't make it up. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Whether we were poolies waiting to ship, recruits at the beginning of our journey, salty dogs with time and service, or veterans, the exact nature of our needs may change or evolve, but certain needs are elemental to all of us as human beings. And that's why I put this slide in there. Certain things are elemental to who we all are. And this graphic shows 5 levels of need in reverse ascending order, meaning those at the bottom are those that come first, and those at the top flow from meeting those lower order needs. Now, let me explain it a little bit. For example, it's very difficult to hold a family or a social network together if you don't have a safe place to live, or a job that pays well enough to cover your bills. Those lower order needs, if you see the physiological needs and safety needs, are foundational to you making and maintaining those good connections you see in the love and belonging section, and having the esteem and the respect and the self-actualization that's sort of the top of the pyramid with respect to your needs. What happens if you do find a job, but have unaddressed issues involving mental health, right? It's out of order. And we see it all the time. You're not getting enough sleep because of nightmares, and your diet is poor because of health issues. It's hard to skip basic needs and expect your higher order needs to remain met. Skipping appointments at the VA, neglecting your health, ignoring problems in your relationships. These aren't remedied by getting a college degree or attaining prestige in your community with some award. So you can't underestimate the importance of addressing your unique physiological needs. You need to feel safe and secure. You need to ask for help to get there, which is a unique quality of strength for you as a veteran, not weakness simply because you mistakenly think of yourself as a civilian. Your safety needs may involve accessing VA benefits, resources, and support. Your need to belong may involve staying connected to your peers and the veteran community. Your esteem needs are met when you're not stigmatized by society just because they see the consequences of service, but have no idea what running toward the sound of danger feels like or entails. We all have these needs, and for veterans, they're different. We need to understand those differences and the relationship that each need has to subsequent needs, so that we cannot always control, but at least we can understand what we're facing. It's like that immovable object that required us to change our orientation in order to deal with and overcome them, all right? And at the top of that pyramid, self-actualization, the desire to become the most one can be, finding and realizing our purpose, which is ultimately what matters to most of us, or at least it should. Next slide, please. Finding your purpose. It's me sitting in front of the Lincoln Memorial one day. What went through my mind probably isn't what would go through most people's minds sitting there. I thought to myself, not just that I was sitting in a spot where some great men and women gave some great speeches, but how fortunate I was to live in a country where somebody like me, no matter what happens to you, can get to a perch like that and share that space, share that air after having overcome some pretty dark days in my time. But what it taught me after 16 years is that our purpose is our only mission, and happiness is the only acceptable outcome. Staying on mission saved many of your lives in the military at one point or another. And even if it was just some aspect of training you didn't know or think you needed, but it made a difference because you had that knowledge. It'll also save your life when you get out, when those immovable objects fall in front of you or the enemy within tests you. Now, I want to give you a little more, at least an understanding of what got me through it by pointing to 4 things to think about as you decide what your purpose is. This isn't going to apply to everybody, of course, but when I talk to veterans over the years, I generally go by this framework because it helps at least give them a way to think about life that doesn't seem so random. And because it worked for me and many others, I consider it as about evidence-based and tested as a mindset can be when you're talking about purpose and what you're truly trying to achieve. Next slide, please. 4 things. What do I love to do? All right. Now, I love speed. That's why I have to budget for speed tickets every year. I drive a little fast on these open roads in my wheelchair accessible minivan. Just because I love it doesn't mean I'm ready for the Coca-Cola 500. All right. So while we first explore what we love to do, you also have to look at what you're good at. What does that mean? As you think about what you love doing as a career after service, maybe you loved your job in the military. Consider whether it was the best use of your skills and talent. For some people, that's not always the case. Conversely, maybe you're good at what you did, but you didn't get fired up every morning to do it. All right. So as you develop your purpose, the sort of purpose-driven roadmap, if you will, after service, think about what you love to do, what you're good at, which could be your MOS, but may very well end up being something else. It's up to you to be honest with yourself as you think about that. What do I love to do? What am I good at? Now, the next 2 considerations are far less under our control and require a ton of patience on your part. Does the community need another sniper? You know, maybe you were good at that job. Maybe that's what you love to do. Maybe your local police force does need that, but you have to be honest with yourself about whether that's the thing that's going to, your community is going to need that, and therefore allow you to find a path forward to making that your purpose. It's not going to be always the case. All right. Again, if your community needs what you're good at and what you love, and you're very fortunate, and that's what you should be inspiring toward. But that's very hard to do, and so you may need to prepare to move, or you may need to be prepared to either find a different community or explore that community a bit more and find out how you can be useful. And then finally, of course, can I get paid to do it? Can I get paid to do it? Now, you're very fortunate if you can find what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and at the same time, you can get paid to do that. But I think those are the building blocks to finding that sweet spot in life after service that will allow you to move through all the other obstacles you'll face and move through all the other difficulties. And as you attempt to meet the needs that we've talked about, if you could hit these 4, I think that's the way forward for a lot of people who otherwise are missing 1, 2, or maybe all 4 of these and can't figure out why they're not happy. Now, I want to say this: don't peg your sense of self-worth to whether the community needs another sniper or an admin chief or logistician or a command sergeant major type. like I said, either go where you're needed or adapt by finding a role that you love and that you're good at and that your community needs. You can't force these needs. It's either there or it isn't, but you can't let it break you if it isn't. You are more than a uniform, your rank or your MOS. I didn't even know what a service officer was when I got out of the Marine Corps, much less desired to be one, but it turned out to be the job that I loved. I got to represent veterans before the VA, argue their claims and appeals in DC. Turned out to be a job that I loved. I got good at it and I got paid to do it. So, and perhaps that was the most important thing, because we meet the other three, but we can't make money doing it. It's a hobby, and it's not going to be a way we can sustain ourselves. But if you can deliberately align these four principles in your quest to find your purpose while prioritizing your unique needs as a veteran and adapt to challenges as they come, like you did in uniform, you'll live a more fulfilling life, even if it requires you to live with the wounds of service, whether mental or physical, that couldn't be avoided. And speaking of those wounds, let's go to the next slide. Now, I want to touch on the wounds of service a bit. I've encountered veterans who'd lost limbs, been shot through the eye, spine, the brain, all lived. Some still have shrapnel in their heads and bodies, and many of these veterans are just happy to be alive and try to live their borrowed time with purpose. It's not true in all cases. I have yet to see a correlation between being wounded and being broken. In fact, many of these veterans who find themselves in crisis are not the ones who left physical pieces of themselves on the battlefield. A lot of them are, or some of them are, but that's not always the case. So being broken isn't necessarily correlated to being wounded. So I want to put that out there, because a lot of folks assume when you hear about the 20 a day that these are men and women who are grievously injured, and I find quite the opposite. Again, some of them are just glad to be alive. But I encounter many veterans who have been broken by life, not trauma, injury, or loss, just life itself. And too many of them take the easy way out, and it hurts. And it makes me wonder, what does it truly mean to be broken? Now, this blurry photo was taken on the day I headed home for the first day after months of acute spinal cord injury rehabilitation. Pictured there with my nurse, Kirsten, and my therapist, Kelly, in the black. And while they were very proud of my progress, they had no idea what I was thinking inside. And that picture up top is probably a better reflection of how I felt and what I thought about life. Life shattered to pieces. And I would spend the next 2 years trying to figure out who I was, believing that time heals all wounds. Only to find out it doesn't. Time doesn't heal wounds. It teaches you how to live with the wounds. Wounds that tell the story of how you survived, not how you were broken or how you suffered. But it took relearning to adapt, which is the whole point of this whole presentation. If you get nothing else out of it, relearning to adapt, maneuvering on immovable objects, whatever the form, whether it was embracing my place in society as a veteran, again, not as a civilian with an identity crisis, understanding my unique needs and making them a priority. More importantly, finding something I love to do, what I'm good at, what my community needs, and in this case, the veteran community, and whether I can make a living doing it, not accepting that I was broken. So I put these pictures up there, not just because I've got Eric up there in a picture with me to brag a little bit and show a little bit of some of the successes we've had with hiring our heroes, but really to lay out what I ended up seeing that I never saw coming. I didn't think this was even possible. When I laid in that bed in San Diego, wondering what was next in my life. My true purpose wouldn't be discovered until I was broken, in a sense, which would unleash my light. All right. And I want to illustrate that a bit. It's kind of hokey, but I use this a lot. I think I may have used it when I was a DI in boot camp a lot of times. We all know what these these things look like, right? They're glow sticks, right? I remember getting in that box before we go out to the field and getting those glow sticks. And if you think about what a glow stick is, it's got a purpose. I just slid it out of its packaging, right? In other words, I'm taking its uniform off to get closer to having it realize its purpose. And what do you have to do to a glow stick to make it work, to give it purpose, right? You snap it, right? You don't break it. It's not broken. Wound it. You snap it in half. And what that does, it unleashes what it's meant to do. And I look at this glow stick as a reminder of the individual I was that had to be pulled out of that packaging and snapped before my true light will be unleashed. All right, those pictures there are that light. That's what I was put here to do. I didn't know that before. I didn't even think it was possible, but that's what I was put here to do. And I want every veteran who may be down or at some point thinking that nothing is worth living, no life is worth living in the way they're living it, to see life differently and to look at life as one driven by a purpose that hadn't been realized yet, and not be satisfied with obstacles in a way that appear immovable. We were taught how to maneuver, we were taught how to reorient, and that doesn't go away just because we take off that uniform. Your purpose isn't hindered by bad decisions or failures. We all have them. I've had my share of them. Some of the best leaders and healers are people who had learned the hard way or suffered profound setbacks. But I'd rather have a veteran who was incarcerated with 5 divorces and beat an addiction be the one to extend his or her hand to me and help pull me out of the hole, because he or she's been there before and knows the way out. And for that alone, their purpose is they're worth their weight in gold, even more so. So I want to leave it there, but I want to end with kind of an illustration of, it wasn't really the end of a journey. It was the end of a phase of lost purpose, of wondering when I'd ever hit a point where the immovable object would finally either move or I get around it. And I was able to capture one of those moments in a video that I shared with some Marines I'd served with, some Marines, or not Marines, but other people I currently work with. But I show it as often as possible to anybody, but certainly to folks who believe that sometimes things are just impossible. And this video illustrates just how not impossible some goals can be if you believe and continue to find a way to get around them. So if you'll roll that, please.
Before I stand up, because this is pretty significant for me personally, I want to express a few thoughts. And really one of the main reasons why I'm doing this, it's not really about me, it's more about the mission that I undertake. And it seems like every single day there's that opportunity to try to save another life, and it gets tiring at times. It hit the Marine Corps pretty high last year. Record number of suicides happened in our Corps, as well as the Navy, as well as the Army. And the question is why? And we saw it in the past 3 weeks where 4 veterans decided to go into a VA facility to take their lives. It takes moments like this to restore what amounts to lost hope for many of them. And so I hope if a veteran sees this and feels hopeless, that this will be an example of what they call protective factors, things that give veterans hope when everything else seems hopeless.
And I just want to thank everyone for sharing that moment with me.
Well, we're working on my video, Sherman, but I do want to, let's see. Apparently our host turned me off from the video. Probably because I was getting in the way of a very good discussion that you were having. And we for those participants who are on the line, if you do have questions, I would ask you to put those in the Q&A section. And we'll ask Sherman those questions. And I do just want to thank you again, Sherman, for those remarkable words and that video. It is definitely very inspirational. As you know, when we've had this discussion, my dad was a Vietnam era veteran and broke his neck between the 6th and 7th vertebrae. Probably, I don't know this for certain right now, but I suspect probably about the same place you did.
Exactly. Yep.
He was one of those veterans, quite frankly, who didn't make it, right? In part because of that darkest day and taking that next step. For you, how do you navigate that dark day when you're sitting there at what you think is a bottom, which may or may not be the bottom, right? I mean, how did you keep focused to really turn that switch from that picture you showed with your nurse and your physical therapist and the feeling inside of being broken, but knowing that there was more out there? How did you navigate that process?
This is really easy for me because the moment I made that turn is when I made the decision to participate in adaptive sports. Before that, I really didn't see a lot of people who were in my circumstances. So I didn't feel like anybody understood. People can say whatever they want, but you really don't know what I'm going through. And it's tough. I spent more time awake at night than in the daytime. So I avoided people for a long time. But at one point I decided, yeah, I'll go on this stupid trip and do these adaptive games. And, it was like this, I got there and I saw more people in wheelchairs with various levels of injury than I saw people walking. And suddenly I didn't feel so out of place in society. I felt like, well, yeah, we're probably all spread out all over the country, but right now I'm looking at this, this place where I'm looking at 400 or 500 people who are, and I guess what's most encouraging is people who are of different ages and lengths of time with the injury. So it gave me a preview of what life could look like if I just got out of this hole. And of course I had to lean on a few guys who were willing to reach that hand out and pull me out by just giving me some insights into how you live with this and how successful you can be in life if you get out of your I don't want to use the wrong term, but you stop feeling sorry for yourself. You know what I mean? You get out of that space where you just want to feel bad and just want to be alone, because these guys are getting out. It's like I don't want to look weak, So I spent the first part of the year when I made the big recovery, getting out of my shell, my hole, and that's the year I decided to go back to work. In fact, I got a job after those games because I physically felt like I could do anything if I had the van, the accessible van, and ate right and dressed like I had somewhere to go, then I could fit in, and I think that began the comeback.
And kind of as a follow-up question to that, you mentioned having that helping hand. I mean, how important, and let's talk a little bit about whether it's
Mhm.
networks or having people around you that can help you with that hand and breaking that isolation.
Right. The first thing I had to do was stop sabotaging my ability to receive that help. If you spend a whole lot of time telling people to go away because they don't understand, they're going to go away eventually. Even if your friends are true and want to be there, eventually it takes its toll on them to constantly be pushed away. So at some point, you got to say enough is enough. I do need help. And looking back on it, you're actually stronger when you ask for that help. You're weak when you don't. You're weak when you fear what that looks like, but you're stronger. It's like your buddy carrying you off the battlefield. You're not going to tell your buddy to put you down because it makes you feel weak. You're going to let him drag you off so you can go back and be productive and maybe save his or her life one day. So I felt like I had to get out of my own way in many ways, and then have the right people around you who are willing to do just about anything you ask if you reward them for the work that they put into you. So when people were willing to come help me out, I felt like I was doing it for them. I feel the same with my wife now. She does all this stuff for me. She gets me dressed. I'm gonna get up and work hard. I owe these people more than self pity and things like that. So what it becomes actually a driving force when you have people around you who do help you, and you want to feel like you're gonna make it worth their time to do that.
Great. Here's a question. They were wondering. The question is, what legislation was being signed in the one photograph that you were in with the president?
So I saw three bills that were signed into law. One was the choice uh, VA Choice Improvement Act. This was before the Mission Act was signed. I don't remember what exactly. It could have been that one, or it could have been the Appeals Modernization. I think that one was in Vegas though, and there was a third one. Um, I've been back and forth to the White House from Capitol Hill so many times, but I think it was the VA Choice Improvement Act, and it's on uh, C-SPAN, and you can type in the Choice Improvement Act, and he actually allowed me to speak at that signing. I got to say some words, which is pretty cool, um, because I didn't, nobody gets put on the spot like that, and I think I rose to the occasion. I hope I did, but yeah, it was a Choice Improvement Act, I believe.
Great, thank you. Um, Here's a question, and really about the. And we talked about what the veteran, the one who's facing the challenges, can and should think about, and really not think about. But what can caregivers do? What can friends do who keep trying, but sometimes feel like they keep running into a wall? I know there's no magic answer to this,
Yeah.
but what does your wife do when those days are sometimes a little bit darker or tougher?
Well, I try to have very few because she's tough. She's tougher than a DI in my experience, and I've been on both sides of that. But I think you have to meet people where they are, because I think what a lot of people underestimate when you encounter a veteran who's in crisis is who that veteran was before he or she fell into crisis, before they went to combat or before they suffered injury. I've come to appreciate over time that that really matters. And so if you have a veteran who's having a hard time, um, you probably want to probe a little bit deeper into who the veteran is holistically as a person. You're going to say the wrong things. Nothing's going to be right. Sometimes it's just that way. But the persistence, I think we appreciate the persistence. Doesn't have to be totally imposing, but the text every now and then, bringing lunch by, drop, social media, a DM every now and then, all that really does matter. I mean, we talk about it like it's just some, sort of hashtag craze, but it really does matter at 11 at night when, some of these guys are alone and they're reaching out by either asking questions or posting things. that somebody care enough to drop in and say, hey, what's going on? Hit them with a text, something really simple. But don't underestimate the power of that sort of random, outreach that might hit somebody at the right moment and make him or her feel cared about when they feel like they're alone.
And how, I mean, obviously we've been talking about, talking about challenges, how much has the current pandemic changed the way that you all AMVETS are doing business? What does that do? What should we think about during, some of these ongoing challenges?
A couple of things, and I'm glad you asked that, Eric. The first thing is that there are things happening that we won't know about until this is all over. So we have people, I know of at least 2 veterans who have died by suicide in the last couple of weeks. That's happening. And these are just 2 high profile cases, but there are going to be people who are going to fall deeper into addiction, depression. And why do I say that? Not to make it sound doom and gloom, but to be ready. That when this post-pandemic era, post-COVID-19 era finally happens, when it does, whenever that is, to be ready to jump in and do the hard work of the cleanup. I tell the VA folks all the time, if you can't track them now because they can't go into hospitals and things like that, you need to have a plan in place for how these folks get contacted about the reopened facilities, put them ahead of the line on the list of those who need help. But don't assume that they're just going to bleed out into other health systems or that the problem evaporated into thin air. This is building, right? And we need to be able to deal with the onslaught that it will be when this thing is finally over. So I think thinking about that, but also keeping in mind a few things. Number one, that veteran suicide was already going up, before this happened. So we're going to see whether that happened at an accelerated rate. The springtime sees the highest rates of suicide for whatever reason. It does have a seasonal aspect to the statistics. So there were a lot of sort of perfect storm issues that were building. And the hope is that all the closeness, though, and all the contact we've had through social media and through Zoom and things like this, that maybe that made a difference somehow. So, and lastly, we better learn from this. Take whatever lessons we can learn, because something like this may happen again, and we need to be a better country for having gone through this by doing better.
Yeah. Here's another question that we have, and we've heard a couple of speakers talk about making lemonade out of lemons. What are you doing to make lemonade out of lemons?
I have saved a lot of money. I actually got healthier. I think we eat better because we have fewer of the bad choices. I didn't like Popeyes as much, but certainly all the ways we were eating weren't the best. But I drink a lot more water. I think it's just getting healthier. I don't know if the family dynamics have gotten better because we're ready to break out and go in our separate directions. But we talk a lot more and we think a lot more. So, and lastly, I get a lot more sleep than I've ever gotten in probably the last, 25 years.
Yeah, that's no doubt about it. It's not as much of a commute time, and and eating healthier are certainly 2 upsides, and being able to work out a little bit more, I think, is good. And look, a focus on health around people is probably a good thing for the long term for the country.
Yep.
Here's a quick one. What's your favorite book on leadership or book in general that helps keep you focused and during this time?
You know what? This is going to be pretty esoteric, but Enchiridion by Epictetus. It talks about the stoic aspects of life and how you look at life and how you internalize pain. I think it's made me a better leader because I can focus on the pain of others a lot easier. So like I said, it's kind of a weird book. It's an old, sort of this treatise on how you live a life where perspective matters more than the actual circumstance you're under. And I think that's made me a pretty good leader. But I always give that to anybody who's a leader under my mentorship, that is going through some pretty tough times, because a lot of it is perspective.
Thank you. What was the book called, Sherman?
Anchoridian by Epictetus.
Okay, great. We'll make sure we get that out as well. Let's talk just for a second about employment. And
Okay.
we're obviously hiring our heroes, so we want to make sure, from a workforce perspective, we're really focused on helping service members navigate this new normal. You talked about being a stranger in your comfort zone of transitioning out of the military. Let's, how did you, whether, you're someone dealing with, transitioning out directly, or, dealing with some additional challenge, what steps do you tell someone when you talk about employment and thinking about, how do you find, that happiness? What do you do if you can't find that job, that
Right.
hobby that pays, right?
It goes, I don't want to give a cop-out answer, but it goes back to what I talked about in the presentation. When you bumped up against things that were impediments to progress at any point in your military career, what did you do? If you do settle for a job, understand that you're settling and maybe not make that your last stop. But what do you have to do to make yourself more competitive in an environment where you wish to have, upward mobility? You can't, I don't know how many times I'll get, senior enlisted guys or even junior officers who will bring me their sort of resume of war colleges and all the things that they did in the military that just aren't valued within the realm of occupation or vocation that they're seeking. Understand your environment. This is your environment. We get veterans who want to work in a corporate environment but want to keep that ball cap on, or grow those scruffy beards out, and they wonder why they're having a problem moving up. You have to adapt. You can't be so wedded to this idea that you're going to lose your veteran identity, that you have to have tokens or things that imprison you to this inability to adapt to the environment that you're in. So if you're working on Capitol Hill, yeah, it's great. Throw your pen on, but you know what? You're not on the battlefield anymore. Adapt. When you were in Iraq and you had to be, some interpreters, you got to put on the dish dash and the disguises and all. You do what you got to do to, blend into the environment and enhance the chances that you're going to be successful, because you've learned to adapt to what the expectation is around you. And if you can't adapt, it's going to show, because people, they'll make you feel like you're not a part of that environment. And that didn't happen in the military. You had to fit in. So just hold on to that idea that adapt and overcome never leaves you, I guess is the only way I can put it.
Yeah. And this may be a related question, or it may have a completely different answer, but from Tommy says, there is a quote that says, "Let your faith be bigger than your fears." What would you tell a veteran when their fears become bigger than their faith and they start feeling down, and they can't get a job? What do you tell them from there?
And I encounter this a lot, and oftentimes it's really situational, because people, when they have fears, in one sense, it's often complicated by things like mental health and things like things that they can't really control. But with respect to fear, I tell any veteran, if you're scared, it's because you're about to do something great. And that typically within the context of changing your circumstances, maybe moving to a different place. I moved from San Diego to DC with no plan, really. Again, that whole thing about plans, it just kind of goes the way it goes. But I had to make a bold move, and I was a newly injured C7 quadriplegic with no real plan. But that was the only thing I could, I wasn't going anywhere where I was in beautiful San Diego, of all places, with all the support I had around me, but I wasn't satisfied. I wasn't going to find the job I wanted. So I had to discomfort myself for a period and accept that it was going to be uncomfortable to get where I needed to get to. But again, that really is driven by who that veteran is, his or her personality. but you got to be willing to put yourself in positions where it's not comfortable, but it's the only pathway to get to where you need to get to. But I'd really, and if that veteran wants me to talk to him or her offline individually, I'd probably ask a lot more about the circumstances to get to the heart of what the fear is or what the issues are, and then mentor that veteran through some different ways to look at maybe the things that create fear or uncertainty.
Thank you. And you know, we're pretty much out of time, which is very disappointing on my end, and I'm sure on your end as well. But I wanted to thank you again for being with us. And you know, my daughter the other day, my 5-year-old, as she's dealing with, you know, the challenges of coronavirus in her 5-year-old head, asked me the other day whether superheroes were real. And I said, they are, they just don't always wear capes. And I want to tell you, Sherman, thank you for being a superhero. For
Thank
so
you.
many people out there who are struggling, and for your work that you do on behalf of all veterans and our disabled veteran community especially. So thank you for being a superhero, and we can't thank you enough for joining us today.
I appreciate that, Eric.
Thanks. And you know, one last thanks to Toyota for helping us sponsor Motivational Mondays. Next week we'll be back with you with another great speaker, so please tune in for that. But be well, be safe, and keep focused, and we're going to get through this together. Thank you all.